This is not the first time in American history we have had a president like Donald Trump. Please watch this, like and reshare. Help me get it out to the algorithm because it's important to understand what is going on now and how we can combat it by understanding that we have been here before. We have done this before. We can and should learn from our history. And I think there's a measure of hope to draw here as well when we learn from the lessons of history. And we have the benefit of hindsight and seeing how things played out. There is a reason the decrepit Cheeto's favorite president is Andrew Jackson, because he was the prototype. The things he did as president, the politics he played, the narcissism that he exhibited should all seem eerily familiar. And if you think that the Cheetos' adoration of Andrew Jackson isn't influencing what he's doing now, you would be wrong. I've seen many Indigenous creators sharing this article here, how Trump's executive orders around the 14th Amendment aim to question the birthright citizenship of Native Americans. Now, initially, the courts didn't recognize that Indigenous Americans were subject to the 14th Amendment out of respect for their sovereignty. Early in our history, our courts had a fair amount of respect for Native sovereignty. In fact, the case Worcester v. Georgia upheld the Cherokee Nation's right to govern itself and its lands. But Donnie's favorite president, Andrew Jackson, said F that, completely ignored the Supreme Court, and forcibly removed the 5 southeastern tribes from their lands, including the Cherokee, and marched them on the Trail of Tears, a horrific genocide committed by Andrew Jackson and his administration that if you are not familiar with, you should go read about it. Andrew Jackson was an out racist who hated Native people. And the Cheeto admires him so much. During his first administration, he took down a portrait of Lady Liberty to put up a portrait of Andrew Jackson. The connection between the Cheeto and Andrew Jackson is nothing new. In fact, I really encourage you to go back and listen to this episode of The Takeaway from 2017. Folks were saying all the way back then how fond the Cheeto was of Andrew Jackson and how much he wanted to emulate things that Jackson did as president. This is the article where I first learned of the connection between the Cheeto and Jackson. Right, he had made a stink, I think, about taking Jackson's face off of our currency and replacing it with Harriet Tubman. But this was the article I read back then. I bookmarked it, and I keep coming back to it over and over again because it really feels like history repeating itself. Jackson was basically a celebrity, a Revolutionary War hero. Again, this article predates the 2020 election, but I immediately thought of it when Stop the Steal became a phrase because Jackson failed to win the first time he ran for president. And his fans said that the election was, quote, stolen from him. So he ran again, spreading all kinds of lies about John Quincy Adams, the president at the time. A real nasty smear campaign. Jackson was also infamous for his petty grievances and taking things incredibly personally. He was involved in over 100 duels. It reminds me very much of how the Cheeto takes every slight incredibly personally, how he wants to weaponize the DOJ. He did weaponize the DOJ in his first administration in order to enact his petty revenge. Just like what we're seeing now, Jackson fired government employees who'd been there for a long time in order to install folks who were loyal to him. Jackson repeatedly ignored the rule of law. He repeatedly ignored Congress. He said F you to the Supreme Court and SCOTUS rulings, which is how we got the Trail of Tears. He said, I do what I want. And basically everybody else in the government let him get away with it because he was a bully. He was known at the time as King Andrew. Have we not all said that thanks to the SCOTUS ruling giving Trump basically complete immunity, we have now created a king in America? Except it's not the first time in America we've had a president who acted as if he were a monarch. I really encourage you to go read this full article by Emmanuel Hapsis from 2017. This is actually probably not the worst period in American history, but it is an echo of where we have been before. We survived the terrible racist dictatorial rule of Andrew Jackson, and there were horrible atrocities carried out during his time as president. He was a petty, vindictive, narcissistic tyrant, one that the Cheeto admires and looks up to and seeks to emulate. So we would all do well to learn about that period in our history. To understand how elected officials at the time failed the entire nation and let Jackson run roughshod over the Constitution, we can learn from history. We can draw encouragement from the fact that these times don't last, that these men overplay their hand, they push folks too far. But also maybe we can learn to cut them off at the pass. Like maybe we don't have to go through the logical progression. Maybe it's not inevitable that things have to get as bad as they possibly can before we can fix them. We need to learn from our history because we are repeating it right now. The Cheeto is intentionally using what Jackson did as a playbook. He's a fanboy of Jackson. He wants to be Jackson 2.0 and another king of the United States. So let's learn from history. Let's understand what's at play and let's do something about it.